Have you noticed how modern strength is often just armor wrapped around fear? You walk into a room and the loudest one demands attention, the coldest one demands respect. But behind both is often a terrified child in an adult body, a child who learned to mask fragility with performance. You've been taught that to survive, you must detach, you must harden, you must become untouchable. But what if I told you that in doing so, you've made yourself invisible to yourself? Somewhere along the line, you began to believe that being affected made you weak, that caring meant losing control, that silence meant defeat. And so you built your strength out of absence. You stopped reacting, stopped feeling, stopped showing up fully. But Carl Jung warned, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. And becoming something real requires more than shutting down. Viktor Frankl, who faced unspeakable horrors, did not survive by turning cold. He survived by holding on to meaning even in the face of devastation. He didn't run from suffering, he stared it down and chose how to respond. And that's the question you're finally ready to ask. What if true strength isn't about becoming unfeeling, but becoming unshakable? Not because you've numbed the world out, but because you've made peace with everything inside. What if becoming untouchable has nothing to do with building walls, and everything to do with building inner order? In this video, we'll look at what true strength is, how to choose your response like Frankl did, why Jung believed wholeness makes you unbreakable, and how stillness becomes your quiet power. There was a time when silence was mistaken for cowardice and gentleness confused with frailty. Even now, in our modern world of noise and image, strength is often paraded as a sharp tongue, a closed face, a refusal to feel. But beneath that performance, something essential is missing. You can see it in the eyes of those who pride themselves on never being affected, a hollow discipline, an armor so tight they've forgotten how to breathe inside it. But let me tell you what strength really is. Strength is not in the suppression of emotion. It is in the understanding of it. It is not in cold detachment, but in the ability to remain fully present without being pulled apart. Carl Jung understood this with rare clarity. He believed that what we call character is not a mask we wear to appear composed. It is the degree to which our inner world is ordered. Not rigid, but integrated. Not numb, but whole. When the psyche is fragmented, when fear rules one part, shame controls another, and rage waits just beneath the surface, the individual may appear calm, but only because they are disconnected. This is not peace. This is paralysis. Jung called it a neurosis of civilization, a collective sickness of disconnection masked as composure. True strength, then, is not the absence of vulnerability, but the inclusion of it. It is the ability to sit with fear without collapsing into it, to feel anger without becoming consumed by it. The prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for executive function and emotional regulation, does not thrive in repression. It thrives in awareness. MRI studies have shown that individuals who engage in emotional suppression activate stress circuits in the brain, particularly the amygdala, more intensely than those who practice emotional acceptance. In simple terms, avoidance is exhausting. Integration is stabilizing. You don't become strong by closing the door on your wounds. You become strong by putting them in order, giving each emotion its rightful place, but not the entire house. Inner order does not mean perfection. It means knowing yourself well enough that no sudden wave, whether it's a betrayal, a criticism, or a moment of fear, can pull you under. Strength is not the clenched jaw or the withdrawn stare. It is the soft gaze of someone who sees clearly and chooses peace anyway. And once you taste that kind of power, the kind that needs no performance, the world starts to lose its grip on you. You no longer need to fight every battle. You no longer feel the pull to react, to prove, to defend. There is a deeper freedom available, one that Viktor Frankl described from inside a concentration camp. He said, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." And that precisely is where we're headed next. Because if inner order is strength, then the freedom not to react is its purest expression. There is a kind of freedom that terrifies people. Not the freedom to do what you want, but the freedom to not be moved by what does not deserve your energy. Viktor Frankl understood this in a place where no human should have to. Inside the walls of a concentration camp, where dignity was stripped, names were replaced with numbers, and even one's breath felt borrowed. He discovered something unshakable. Not in the guards, not in the machinery of cruelty, but within himself. He wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Think about that. You are not what happens to you. You are what you do with what happens. And that gap, that sacred space between impulse and reaction, is where the soul becomes untouchable. Modern neuroscience would later confirm what Frankl discovered in agony. The anterior cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex, the very regions involved in self-regulation and perspective-taking, are activated when we pause before reacting. And when individuals meditate, reflect, or engage in meaning-making practices, the brain physically changes. Neuroplasticity reshapes the structure of the mind around what we focus on. Which means, every time you choose stillness over reaction, you are not suppressing yourself. You are reprogramming yourself. You are telling your nervous system, "I am no longer a servant to chaos." But this is not easy. The compulsion to react is ancient. It comes from the amygdala, the part of the brain wired for survival, quick to anger, quick to fear. In evolutionary terms, reactivity once saved your life. Today, it merely steals your peace. You respond to a tone, a text, a look, as if your identity depends on defending itself. But what if it didn't? What if the need to explain, to justify, to retaliate, was the very thing making you smaller? Frankl said that man is not destroyed by suffering. He is destroyed by suffering without meaning. So what meaning do you give to your own reactions? To the need to prove yourself? To the way your voice rises when you feel dismissed? Are these responses yours, or echoes of old wounds you've never touched? This is not about passivity. It is about precision. Silence not as withdrawal, but as command. Choosing not to engage, not because you're weak, but because you're finally aware of what's worth your energy. Frankl did not survive because he became numb. He survived because he became free. Free from the belief that others control his essence, that pain determines his path, that cruelty owns his mind. And you have the same space within you, the same power to pause, to decide, to rise inwardly while the world tries to pull you down. But here lies a paradox, because in learning not to react, you might begin to feel something strange, a disconnect, even a coldness. You might wonder if becoming untouchable means becoming distant. But that's not wholeness, that's armor. And Jung had something very different in mind. If this content is resonating with you, consider subscribing. I make videos that help you see the world and yourself more clearly. Thank you. There is a difference, a sacred difference between being untouchable and being unreachable. between emotional maturity and emotional absence. But in trying to protect yourself from the world, it's easy to drift into isolation and call it strength. Carl Jung saw this danger long before it had a name. He believed that wholeness, not perfection, not control, was the highest goal of the human psyche. And wholeness, by its very nature, requires that we remain touchable, not vulnerable to every storm, but open enough to feel the rain on our skin and still know we will not drown. You see, many confuse detachment with enlightenment. They believe shutting down is the same as rising above. But Jung warned that repressing emotion, especially under the guise of strength, does not free us. It fragments us. It creates what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we exile in the name of appearing calm, rational, composed. And what we exile eventually controls us. Scientific studies now echo this truth. Suppressed emotion doesn't disappear, it goes inward. A landmark study by Dr. James Gross at Stanford found that emotional suppression increases physiological arousal. In simple terms, the body absorbs what the psyche avoids. Heart rate, cortisol levels, even inflammation markers rise when we keep it together by force. The stillness of repression is not peace, it is quiet suffering. To be untouchable in the way Jung envisioned is not to become cold. It is to become so inwardly integrated that nothing within you can be used against you. You are not numb to sadness, you've just made peace with its presence. You are not immune to anger, you've simply named it, studied it, learned when to hold it and when to release it. And perhaps most importantly, you are no longer afraid of being affected, because what touches you no longer breaks you, it reveals you, it brings to the surface what you have already come to know and accept within. Wholeness is not sterile, it is wild, it is the harmony of contradiction, it is being able to grieve and still move forward, to be disappointed and still love, to be wounded and still keep your heart open. And this is where the world begins to misunderstand you. Because in a culture addicted to extremes, silence or shouting, withdrawal or explosion, your quiet clarity confuses people. They'll say you've changed, that you've become distant, that you no longer care. But what they really mean is that they can no longer manipulate your center. You feel deeply, you just no longer bleed for everything. Jung wrote, "Only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. And wholeness is precisely that, paradox lived consciously. But there is one more step. You've begun to reclaim your emotional space. You've stopped reacting. You've stopped splitting off parts of yourself just to appear unbothered. And now you must sit in the stillness that remains, not as a pause, but as power." Stillness, not the kind found in silence between two thoughts, but the kind that lives beneath every storm, untouched, unwavering, unbothered by the noise of the world. This is not a stillness of passivity. It is not apathy. It is not giving up. It is the stillness of one who has already searched every room in their soul and has nothing left to fear within it. Carl Jung called this individuation, the arrival at one's true center, where the noise of the ego no longer drives your movements, where meaning becomes louder than impulse, where your identity is no longer a mask you wear, but a home you return to. Viktor Frankl saw this stillness too, not in theory but in practice. In The Belly of Suffering, he wrote that man can survive any how if he has a why. And this why, this chosen meaning, is the foundation of inner power. The moment you stop asking life to stop hurting you and start asking what the pain is here to teach, you step into a realm few ever reach. Modern psychology confirms it. Meaning-making, the ability to assign value and purpose to suffering, activates networks in the brain associated with resilience and adaptive response. In studies on trauma survivors, those who could extract meaning from their suffering exhibited higher emotional regulation, lower PTSD symptoms, and longer-term mental stability. In other words, meaning does not erase pain, it reorganizes it into strength. Stillness, then, is not the absence of reaction. It is the presence of meaning. It is what happens when you've seen the futility of emotional chaos and choose to respond only when response is sacred. When you realize that not everything deserves your energy, that not every battle is proof of life, that sometimes the most powerful act is to remain grounded, while the world demands that you tremble. This stillness is not genetic, it is cultivated, in small moments, in the pause before speaking, in the breath before judging, in the decision to walk away not because you're defeated, but because your peace is worth more than your pride. It is the posture of someone who does not rush to be understood because they understand themselves, who no longer needs the room to change because they are not trying to control it, who has stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and started asking, "What is this calling forth within me?" Stillness is not stagnation. It is precision. It is maturity. It is the quiet rebellion of choosing meaning over reflex, of choosing clarity over reaction. And it changes everything. You begin to speak less, but say more. You enter rooms with presence, not performance. You stop reacting to shadows and start living from your center, not untouched by life, but unshaken by it. Because in the end, becoming untouchable was never about building walls. It was about building something deeper, a kind of wholeness so complete that nothing outside of you has the power to rearrange what you've made peace with inside. And that is the kind of power no one can take.